Hello friends, today we are going to discuss the fifth unit, which is about report writing. You would recall that once you have conducted the research, you have to present your findings in the form of a report, and you also have to present your findings. So report writing becomes a very important skill, and you would also recall that in the research process this was the final step. So let us discuss the basics of report writing. I would not be discussing this in very significant detail. The reason is that in business communication we have already read about the various kind of reports and how to prepare these kind of reports. So let us start. Now, what are the various contents of a report? See, basically the report consists of three sections. The first section is the introductory section, which contains these title page, certificate of authorization or student declaration, acknowledgement, table of contents, which is at times also called index, then list of illustrations, and then executive summary or the abstract. Now, once we are through with the introductory section, we move on to the main body of the report. This is the main part of the report, and it includes introduction, literature review, research methodology, data presentation, data analysis and results, recommendations and limitation of the study. Now, please stick to this particular sequence. This sequence is very important, sacrosanct. You cannot violate this particular sequence. So the sequence has to be adhered to while preparing your own report. So you have to ensure that while you are preparing your report, you have to proceed in the fashion which has been shown here on the slide. So the sequence has to be exactly as per shown on the slide. Now, concluding section will again have references and bibliography and then annexures. Let us talk about all of them one by one. Things which we already know about a lot, we are not going to discuss them in detail. We are only going to just browse past them, and things which probably are new to us, they will be discussed in comparatively greater detail. So now let us begin with the introductory section. You know that the first thing that comes up is this title page. Now have a look at this particular title page. This has been copied from a report, end term project on. So basically now we understand that this is the end term project on study of consumer perception of Airtel prepaid mobile services in Pithoragarh. Now this is the topic of the report, submitted by the name of the student and his roll number is given, in partial fulfillment for requirement of 2-year full-time postgraduate program. So this student must be doing this particular study to fulfill the requirements of his MBA program, and that is what has been mentioned here. Then submitted to, so you have to mention the name of the institute. In our case it would be Department of Business Administration, LSM, Government PG College. So you don't have to write the name of your project guide, because basically you are not submitting to the project guide. You are doing your research under the project guide, and basically you are submitting it to your institute or to the faculty or to the department. And the address has also been given. So you have to stick to this particular format. There are other formats also, but then there can be so many different formats, but this is one format which you can stick to. Then there is a certificate of authorization. You can have a look at the language. You can straight away copy this language and make modifications. For example, in the name, in the place of the name of the candidate, you can mention your own name, and then you have to mention the name of the institute. So these kind of modifications you can bring in on your own. Now this has been signed by this has to be signed by the candidate, and once it has been signed by the candidate, basically this will also have to be countersigned by the project guide. In this case it was the guide was Mr. Somnath Chakrabarti. So you have to get it signed by the project guide also. And basically this is a declaration which tells the reader that actually this is a bona fide work of the candidate. and that is why it is called certificate of authorization. Now we move on to acknowledgement. You know what we cover in acknowledgement. In acknowledgement, we basically acknowledge the contribution of those people who have helped us in our research work. So it could be your faculty, it could be somebody working with some organization whom you have contacted to get your questionnaires filled. It could be somebody who has helped you with data collection. It could also be somebody who helps you with data analysis. It could be a friend of yours, it could be a senior of yours. So depending on whosoever has helped you out while doing your research work, you can mention the names of those people, and you can express your gratitude to those people on this particular page, and that is why we include this particular content in the introductory part of the report, the acknowledgement. You can have a look at this is one format. There can again be many different formats, but then the idea is that whenever you are using these kind of formats, you actually take a format which has been used by somebody who is more reliable. Maybe a student who is studying in a very good institute, or maybe from an actual corporate report submitted to the senior management by somebody from the middle or the lower management. So this is what acknowledgement is all about. Now this is the table of contents. You know already what table of contents basically mean. You have to mention all the contents which are there part of the report, and against them you have to mention the specific page numbers. So this has been given here. Now everything which will follow, which includes the main body of the report plus the concluding section, the bibliography and the references and the annexures, everything will have to be mentioned here, and then against that particular section you have to mention the page number on which that particular section can be found. Now this is one thing that you have to again take into consideration while you are preparing your own report. Now let's talk about a slightly different list. The earlier one was the list of contents or the table of contents. Now this is the list of illustrations. Illustrations, basically you know what illustrations are. They can be diagrams and figures, they can be maps, photographs, bar charts or pie diagrams, scatter plots, data tables, etc. So these all are included. They're all illustrations of different types, and what basically you have to do is basically you have to give a list of all the illustrations which you have used in the order in which they are appearing in your report, and against all the illustrations thus mentioned you will have to also specify the page number. Why is list of illustration given? So that if a particular reader wants to go straight away to a particular data table, he can look at the list of illustrations, find out where that particular data table is in the research report, and then he may straight away go to that particular page number and read the data table. So that is the job of the list of illustrations. That is the function that list of illustrations perform. So it's similar to table of contents. Executive summary and abstract. Now this again is part of the introductory section, and now this is something which is basically introducing the reader to what is going to follow in the main part of the report. So it is just a summary of what is going to be discussed and deliberated upon in the main body of the report. It is at times also called the abstract. Now what does it describe? It describes the background of the research problems or the research objectives, and the findings and the recommendations. So basically you organize executive summaries or the abstracts in paragraph form. They could be at times 2 to 3 paragraphs, more than that also, but now it has got to be very short. It has to be very brief. You have to describe all these aspects in very brief. So the same thing has been mentioned here. The length has to be very brief, only 1 to 2 pages at your level. Maybe if you are submitting some kind of a research report to your client who has asked you to prepare a report, who has given away the contract of preparing the report to you, then in that case the executive summary may stretch to maybe, let's say, 5 to 10 pages, but at your level it has to be somewhere around 1 to 2 pages and around 3 to 5 paragraphs. The purpose is to inform the reader about the contents of the report. Now let us come to the main body of the report. So you know already that some of the contents which are there we have already discussed. So we'll be just browsing through them. We have already read about all these things, so we'll just be browsing through them very quickly. So the first thing that you have to mention is the introduction, wherein you talk about the research area, what basically you have tried to find out, and the organization. Suppose you are conducting your research with a particular organization. Maybe you might have conducted your teacher satisfaction survey with Seemant Institute of Technology, Pithoragarh. Then you will have to talk a little bit about the organization. But then you have to keep it very brief, and you only include relevant information. So you don't include all the information about the organization in which you have conducted your research. You write about the CEOs and the number of... That does not make sense. You only have to be mentioning the relevant information. So you have to keep it very brief. Then comes the literature review, wherein basically you talk about the learnings from the related research by others. So naturally, when you start your research, you basically first look for other researchers who have done the similar kind of work, because that might inform your research process. That might be helpful in guiding you in your research endeavor. So whatever you have read which is relevant to your current topic and which is a work of other researchers who have done similar kind of work, you have to mention those aspects, mention those learnings in this particular section. So these are the learnings from the related research by others. Now we come to the third section, which will be the research methodology. You already know what research methodology is. In fact, this is the subject that we are studying here. In research methodology, you would remember the research process, and in fact you simply have to write down the process here. Research objective, what were your research objectives and what were the hypotheses, then what was the research design that you went for, how did you collect the data, what was the method, what was the sampling procedure. You would remember that we've discussed all these things. And then how do you plan to analyze the data that you obtain through whatever data collection method you have gone for. So how do you analyze that? So these things have to be mentioned in the section which is called the research methodology. Why are we doing this? So that if the reader wants to know as to how actually, what particular procedure did we adopt, so he can look at the research methodology section. He'll find out what particular procedure did we adopt. Did we go for probability sampling or did we go for non-probability sampling? He can look at the sampling procedure under the research methodology section. He'll understand whether we have gone for sampling, probability sampling or the non-probability sampling. So this is the basic idea behind including this particular section. Now once this has been done, and you would recall research methodology when we are mentioning basically, we talked about research objectives and design and data collection, sampling procedure, analysis plan. But then once you have done all these things, once you have actually collected the data, then you will have to also represent that data. You will have to present that data to the reader, and so the next section would be data presentation. You may use bar diagrams, pie charts. There are so many tools available to present data. You can use any of them. When you go to Excel also, or maybe at times in PowerPoint also, you might find these kind of functionalities, maybe bar diagrams or maybe histograms or frequency curves and pie charts, scatter plots. So you have to basically present your data in this particular section using all these, using some of these tools. Once you have presented the data, the next step that will follow is going to be the data analysis, wherein basically you are going to make use of statistical tools. At your level, you are only expected to use mean, median, mode, or standard deviation or correlation. All these things you remember that you have already learnt in your first semester, and that was the reason why that was taught in the first semester in the first place. Otherwise, had that been of no use to you, why would have that been included in your syllabus. So you have done all these things in the statistics for business decision paper. So the same thing, you'll have to use the same tools that you have studied about in the particular paper. You have to use here to analyze the data that you have obtained. So I have just given you a indicative list of what all tools which are available there. At your level, these many tools are sufficient, but naturally if you go to some really good research reports by really experienced academicians, you would find that they have used so many advanced tools also. But at your level, these kind of tools would be sufficient. Now we come to the concluding part, and the concluding part was basically, it consisted of 3 sections. The first one was the references. Now what is basically a reference? See, this is the material that you have cited. What do we mean by cited? You have used it directly in the research. So some material or maybe some finding by some other researcher which you have used directly in your research. So that will have to be included in the reference section. It could be research papers, as I said, by some other researcher. It could be some particular portion of a book. It could be a news that has appeared in a newspaper. It could be a website. So there can be so many sources from which you might be citing directly, which you might be using as it is in your research. So all these things you will have to mention here. Now, why is mentioning all these things important? Because if you don't mention these things, it would be assumed that you are claiming that this is your own work. So for example, if I'll give an example, if I'm, let's say, talking about 4 P's of marketing mix, but I don't mention the source from which I have taken 4 P's, it would be assumed that I am trying to claim that 4 P is my own invention, which is not the case. In such case, you might be charged of plagiarism. Plagiarism is basically the theft of somebody else's intellectual property, maybe somebody else's model, or maybe the finding which has been the findings of some other researcher. If you are copying them without attributing it to some source, without telling the people about what the actual source is, then it would be considered that you are trying to deliberately mislead the researcher, mislead the reader into believing that that is your own intellectual property, that is your own creation, and this is called plagiarism. And in many places, including in India, plagiarism is punishable by law. So you have to ensure that whenever you are preparing your reports, make sure that you don't copy from some other work. In case you are copying, then you'll have to attribute. Then you'll have to mention the source in the references section. Now you need to know that references, how you actually mention references. How do you write down the references? There are some particular styles which you have to use. So at this level, I don't need to tell you about all these styles, but you just need to understand that there are different styles of referencing, and one style I have shown here so that you can have a look at it. See, the first reference, Grundrose C. Now this is the name of the person who has written a particular research paper from which I have quoted something, from which I have borrowed something, and the topic of his research paper is a service quality model and its marketing implication. European Journal of Marketing 1984 is the journal in which this particular research paper has appeared. So, do you understand how do we write it? We start with the surname of the researcher, surname of the author, then the first name in short, and then we, within inverted commas, we mention the topic of his research, and then once inverted commas have been closed and there's a comma, and then in italics you mention the name of the journal, research journal in which this particular research paper has appeared, and then after comma you also mention the year of publication. Is this understood? So this is how you actually mention the references. Now similarly for the reference number 2, and similarly for Reference number 3 here, A. Palkar is the author, and the topic of his research paper was Determinants of Customer Satisfaction for Cellular Service Providers, and it appeared in Udyog Pragati, January-March quarter in 2004. Then we have probably also borrowed from the Times of India, Delhi edition, January 16, 2007 at your level. This is how you mention. And then we are also mentioning the URL, the website address of from where we have borrowed some piece of information, www.convergence.in. At your level, it is sufficient for you to know that this is how you basically have to mention all the references. Now once you are done with references, you move over to bibliography. Now what is bibliography and what is the difference between bibliography and reference? Background readings and other material which help the researcher is bibliography. So in this sense it is almost similar to the references, the background reading and other material which has helped the researcher. But what is the difference? It is not cited, it is not used directly in the research. So you not actually directly used it or quoted it in your research. Then it will become bibliography. For example, suppose you are doing some kind of a research to find out what customer satisfaction is, and naturally you have been issued a book from the library. Suppose that book is the Marketing Management by Kotler, and though you may not have actually quoted some material from that particular book written by Philip Kotler, but naturally the knowledge that you have gained from Philip Kotler's Marketing Management, that must have helped you in your research. And this is one thing that you can mention in bibliography, because you are not quoting any material directly from that particular book, but naturally it has helped you out in your research, because there only you understood what the customer satisfaction is all about. So these kind of things you can always mention in the bibliography section. Then we move over to the annexures. Now what are annexures? They are placed at the end. Material which if put in the middle of the report may obstruct its flow. So we place these kind of materials at the end. This may include the various types of questionnaires, the pilot questionnaire, we have discussed what pilot questionnaires are, and the final questionnaire, the statistical tables, the random number tables. You would remember we have been using the random number table in probability sampling, log and anti-log tables, secondary data tables, census report, newspaper cutting, maps, etc. So these are the things which you put at the end. So I hope now you understand what basically are the contents which you have to mention in your research report, and what is the sequence. You are expected to adhere to these guidelines when you are writing your own research report. Thank you very much for your time, and with this we have completed the syllabus in research methodology, and very soon you would be getting your real life projects. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed these sessions.